this is Stephanie with House of Fritz, and I hope you're doing well today. Thanks for joining me. I wanted to share another project with you. Let's get started. Today I'm going to share with you a painted silver tray with IOD Transfers from the new summer release St. Germain's transfer book. This tray is not silver plated or even sterling in any way, so it's a very cheap tray that's just silver tone that I got at the Goodwill. I'm going to take off the price tag, which I left on so you could see how inexpensive it was. A lot of people don't like when you paint silver trays. I understand that. A lot of them are really pretty, but this one is very cheap. So I start by cleaning it, and then I decide I'm going to mix a custom color. So I pull out some DIY paints. I pull out Petticoat Pink, and I use a spoon to try to get some in the cup. Pull out Cowgirl Coral, I think it is actually, and I add some of that. I add some Kissing Booth eventually, and some White Swan. I'm really just trying to get a pretty coral color with a pink undertone that's not too bright. So I do have to add some Kissing Booth to it to get more pinkness instead of as much orange as was coming through at that point. And then of course I add the White Swan. So I get the right color and I start painting on the tray. And one thing about DIY paint colors is that they're very highly pigmented and concentrated, and you get a really good coverage even in the first coat of most of the colors. But I believe this took multiple coats, and so I laid down the first coat covering the whole front side, getting into the details, because at some point I want to wet distress the edges and a couple of little spots like it's naturally worn off. So I give it one full coat, and then I take my heat tool and dry it. DIY paint dries pretty fast, but the heat tool helps it along quite a bit. Then I take the second coat and go ahead and try to give it a good even coat. So I'm going ahead and finishing the second coat of paint, and I can see some places that just didn't get covered well in the first coat. But sometimes if you go over this paint too much, you reactivate the first coat, and so it gets a little bit tricky to cover some of the areas that have less paint in them because you reactivated it and then you moved the first coat around. So you do have to be careful going over any spot too often. And so after I put on the second coat, I go ahead and dry it with the heat tool. Again, this just is it's a great tool to get your projects done, especially when you're making a video. You just need things to happen quicker. You can see that I touched the edge, and so it moved some of the paint around that was still too wet, and I had to retouch it up. And so then of course I finished drying it. And then you will see me come back into the video and the lighting's changed, which I'll tell you about that in a minute. But before I do, I actually did the wet distressing, and I must have not hit record on the video, so you didn't get to see that. But what you do is you just take a baby wipe or a wet cloth, and you literally just rub the paint off. This paint's great for that. But so you go back to the clip, you see the lighting has changed, and I just want to point out that I have this great spot in front of a big window, and normally I have the best lighting ever, and I do a lot of this during the day, so the lighting's great. And this happened to be a rainy day, so I had to turn the light on. But I take my St. Germain transfer and lay it down, and I use my IOD transfer stick to burnish it onto the tray. I also will point out that I did seal, after I wet distressed it, I did seal the paint in. And that's important to do with IOD transfers because they really need kind of that slick surface to adhere to, and you want to make sure your paint's really dry for this also. So of course I did those 2 steps before laying down the transfer, but you'll just see that I worked the transfer using the stick to press down and help it to release onto the tray. And so I just keep working at it, and then, you know, at some point, if you lift up on that and part of it doesn't adhere, you can lay it back down and rub your transfer stick over it again so that it does adhere properly. And then you'll see that I had to lay it back down just because there was a tiny little piece that didn't adhere. And so once I was finished, I took the sheet and I burnished the transfer down to make sure that it adhered properly. But one thing that happened, and you may not be able to see it right here, is that something happened where when I rubbed, it created like a dark spot. And so I have to deal with that in a few minutes. But I end up putting clear wax on it to seal it in, because I also, you know, you have to seal the transfers after you put them down, but I also will want to add dark wax so that I can make it look older and more distressed. So I put the wax down, and now I'm wiping off the excess, and this is where I start noticing the little spot. And so, of course, trying to fix it and using, you know, my automatic perfectionism, I take a little sanding pad and decide that I'm going to sand it in those spots just to try to remove that dark spot, whatever happened to it. It was rubbed on the clear coat too much. This is actually where the project kind of took a turn for the worse, and I'm leaving all this in here just because I feel like you should see that everybody has a problem sometimes with their project. So I finished sanding it, and then I go off camera, and I did a couple of things off camera where I sanded it too much and decided I'm going to touch it up. But because I had already put so many different finishes on it, when I touched it up, I couldn't quite get the paint finish to match. And you'll see later in the video that I start having these little blotchy spots when I go into the video the next day. The lighting is much better. You can see it's the next day, and I decided I'm going to put clear wax on it again. Well, I had touched it up with some other paint on top of the multiple other layers of paint and the top coats that were already on there. And when I added the clear wax, it, you know, of course, changed it a little bit again, and probably was getting into the raw paint spots that I had touched up. So when I add the dark wax, you can see that it gets really blotchy, but you know, I add enough to where I can get it into all the creases and the indentions in the edging, and then I will start rubbing it back, and that's when you will start seeing the blotchiness more so. And I just had to really figure out how to recover at that point, because I didn't want to scrap this whole thing. There's got to be a way to make it look better, add some more wax, do something. But really what needed to happen, and you'll see as I'm wiping it off, you'll see the spots that I'm talking about. I took some clear wax on a cloth at one point and really just wiped those spots a lot more. But ultimately what helped was for it to just sit, absorb what I had put on top. And then I really don't think it ended up looking as bad as it did in this part of the video at the end whenever we do the pan over it and see the picture of the finished project. But I think also, you know, you just see all of your own mistakes a lot more. And so I want to encourage you guys to just keep trying. And guess what? You may see it, but the person who ends up with it may not ever notice it as a mistake. It's probably because you know that you made some sort of mistake that it stands out to you even more. So at this point, I'm just gonna stop and I'm gonna let it sit. And as you see, in the finished picture that it's really not too bad. It recovered pretty well, and because I know where the spots are, it probably stands out. But anyway, I want to thank you for joining me, and I hope that you enjoyed the video and that you hit like and share it out, and leave me a comment to let me know how you would have recovered the video project, and what you would have done to repair it, or if you would have just said, hey, it is what it is, and that is the end of it. So anyway, thanks so much for joining me, and I will see you next time.